Hello and welcome to episode number 131, where I talk with Marlysa Sullivan about the Polyvagal Theory. We delve deeper into the 3 neural platforms and the 5 global states of the autonomic nervous system, and we also look at the relationship of the mental gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas to these neural platforms. So please stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Elements of Ayurveda, Empowering Wisdom of Life. I'm your host, Colette, and in this podcast, I hope to empower you to take charge of your own health by sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition from India. We will also discuss topics like health and wellness, nutrition, yoga, fitness, meditation, breath work, and much more, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature, to Mother Nature, and to each other. If you like the content, be sure to subscribe to the show, and the new episodes will automatically download for you to enjoy. If you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend you listen to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. I've also set up a Facebook group for us to connect and to support each other, and I'd love for you to join me over at Elements of Ayurveda podcast group. And now here's the show. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Banyan Botanicals. Since March, immune boosters have been in high demand like never before. When Banyan Botanicals, one of my favorite Ayurvedic companies, started running low on their top immune system supplements, they created a brand new custom blend for the present moment called Immune Health Now. Immune Health Now is a powdered herb blend that combines powerful Ayurvedic herbs such as turmeric, amalaki, and neem to bolster the body's natural defenses, supporting the lungs and respiratory tract and promoting mental calmness, which we could all use during these uncertain times. Also, Banyan plans to adapt and evolve the formula depending on the highest quality herbs for the immune system they have available, which truly makes it an herbal blend for the present moment. This product regularly sells out. It's that popular. So you'd better pick up your Immune Health now. And while you're at it, don't forget to check out Banyan's fantastic free Ayurvedic content on their website. Save 20% on Immune Health Now by visiting banyanbotanicals.com/elements. That's with an S, banyanbotanicals.com/elements. Banyan ships only to the US, and I will put the link in the show notes. And now let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to Elements of Ayurveda. Today I'm very happy to welcome Marlysa Sullivan, who is a physiotherapist and yoga therapist with over 15 years of experience working with people suffering with chronic pain conditions. She is an assistant professor in yoga therapy and integrative health sciences at Maryland University of Integrative Health and holds an adjunct position at Emory University, where she teaches the integration of yoga and mindfulness into physical therapy practice in the DPT program. She is the co-editor of Yoga and Science in Pain Care, Treating the Person in Pain, as well as several peer-reviewed articles. She also has an upcoming book titled Understanding Yoga Therapy, Applied Philosophy and Science for Well-Being. Marlysa has been involved in the professionalization of the field of yoga therapy through the Educational Standards Committee of IAYT, which helped to define the competencies for the field, and in characterizing the yoga therapy workforce through research. Her research interests focus on defining the framework and explanatory model for yoga therapy based on philosophical and neurophysiological perspectives. Today, Marlysa and I are going to discuss the Polyvagal Theory and the Gunas. Marlysa, welcome to the show. I'm very happy to have you here today and to discuss the Polyvagal Theory and the Gunas. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to get to share this information with you and have the conversation.
Yeah, we've talked in other episodes, previous episodes, about the autonomic nervous system and the two branches of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And we've also talked a lot about the vagus nerve. And however, I'm really looking forward to delving deeper into the polyvagal theory today, and in particular, how it relates to the gunas. But before we do that, Marlysa, I'd love for you to, if you could, give us an overview of the autonomic nervous system and the vagus nerve, just like a 101 for listeners who are new to it. That would be amazing.
Sure. Yeah. So the autonomic nervous system controls all of our involuntary functions, or all the autonomic functions, such as like your blood pressure, that change in blood pressure that happens as you go from lying down to sitting to standing, heart rate, breath rate, digestive processes. So the autonomic nervous system is controlling all these things that we need for daily life, so that we don't have to think about them. There's two main branches, which are known as the sympathetic. And the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for mobilizing our system. So raising the heart rate, raising the blood pressure, creating muscle tension so that we're able to think quicker, have greater dexterity, coordination, muscle control, those kinds of things. It mobilizes us for action. The parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for slowing everything back down to states of restoration and relaxation, as well as digestion. The vagus nerve is, the word vagus means wandering, and it's because it's one of the longest nerves in our body. It goes from the brainstem, so near the very top of our neck, and then wanders down and innervates many of our organs, our heart, our lungs, our intestines. And the vagus nerve is the primary conduit of the motor response of the parasympathetic nervous system, meaning that it's the primary way that our system has the effect for slowing down and restoration. It's primarily responsible for that. The other function of the vagus nerve, about 80% of its fibers are actually interoceptive, meaning that it takes information from our organs to our brain so that our brain knows the state of our digestive system, the state of our lungs, the state of our blood pressure and our blood, and those things.
Wonderful. That was an amazing explanation. Thank you so much for that. And so if you could delve a little deeper here now and talk to us about how these systems interact to a real or a perceived threat. How do they work together to regulate the body and the mind?
Yeah, so Stephen Porges, who we'll talk about as we go into polyvagal theory as well, because he is the developer and creator of that theory, has this term called neuroception. And the significance of this, it's the idea that the nervous system is always scanning the environment to notice if there's danger or safety. So without our conscious control, our eyes are seeing things, our ears are hearing things, our skin is feeling things, interoceptive information is going from my organs and my body to my brain so that my nervous system can create a quick response to danger and help me come back to safety quickly. So that it's not that my conscious mind is doing it, that it's that my nervous system is underlying this ability to scan what's going on and to rev us up in case of danger or to relax us when there's safety. So when the sympathetic system is mobilized, it's going to result in a whole continuum of mobilization, from quick thinking, creativity, dexterity, coordination, muscular engagement. There's this thing called the stress performance curve, where under the right amount of stress, we actually have quicker thinking, dexterity, coordination in line with what the environment is asking. So it's everything we need to do to respond quickly and act. The thing about the sympathetic nervous system, or really the autonomic nervous system, is it's creating a shared physiological, psychological, and behavioral response. So when my nervous system perceives danger, it's going to physiologically mobilize. My emotions that are going to arise are going to be things like fear, anxiety, worry, quick thinking, those kinds of things. And my behaviors are going to be about mobilization for action. When my parasympathetic nervous system is activated, so when my nervous system perceives safety, there's this simultaneous slowing down of all the systems of the body, my cardiovascular, my endocrine, my immune, my digestive system. It's not slowed, but it's actually mobilized to digest well, so that we have rest and digest. So when the parasympathetic system is activated, we have this shared physiological, psychological, behavioral response that creates restoration in the body. It creates psychological states like calm or ease, and behavioral responses such as the ability to relax and connect with others.
That was a great explanation there, really clear. And so you mentioned the polyvagal theory, Porges's polyvagal theory, and that delves deeper and describes these 3 neural platforms and the 5 global states of the autonomic nervous system, which we haven't discussed in the podcast before. So I'd love for you to explain this to us, please.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is most relevant about polyvagal theory to our work in yoga and probably Ayurveda is this idea that the nervous system is underlying shared physiological, psychological, and behavioral responses. So instead of looking at what's going on in the body and doing one thing for that, what's going on in the mind and doing another for that, and what's going on in behavior and doing something else for that, what we're looking at is, can we shift the neural platform in order to create a different state of the body and mind and behavior together? So in polyvagal theory, the 2 that we're most familiar with would be the sympathetic nervous system, which he calls defensive mobilization. So when my nervous system perceives danger, all of my systems of the body are going to be mobilized together synchronistically in order to take action. My mental and emotional state is going to mobilize towards being more narrow focused and helping me get to safety by creating anxiety, fear, worry, agitation. And then my behaviors are going to be that fight or flight. Right. He talks what we often think of as a relaxation response. He adds a bit to that, and it's called the social engagement system or the social communication system. So what he found is that the vagus nerve actually has 2 origination sites from 2 different places in the brainstem. And from one origination site, it actually connects the response of the heart with muscles of the throat, with muscles of the face, with muscles of the inner ear. So when that relaxation response is activated, when I perceive safety, or more correctly, when my nervous system perceives safety, the social engagement system is going to activate, which is going to create a lower heart rate, lower blood pressure, lower respiratory rate, good heart rate variability. It's going to help my immune system and my endocrine system and all the systems of my body to activate towards healing and restoration. At the same time, it's going to create a better quality of voice, vocal prosody, so that I communicate safety. It's going to create a relaxation in my muscles of facial expression so that people can perceive safety from me. It's going to change the activation of the muscles of the inner ear, so I'm able to hear human sound from white noise. So what the relaxation response does is it's this co-activation of these nerves in this area of the brainstem that helps to create physiological restoration, psychological calm and safety and equanimity, and behavioral connection, things like compassion and empathy.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and then he adds, what he found was that there was this other origination site of the vagus nerve in what's called the dorsal motor nucleus, and it innervates mostly the organs that are underneath the diaphragm. And what the theory talks about is that in immense life threat, instead of just having a fight or flight response, we have another response to threats, and that is death feigning. Sometimes people get a little confused about the freeze response. So the freeze is actually a co-activation of the sympathetic, and this one I'm talking about right now, because the body is mobilized for action. In death feigning, the body goes limp. It's the muscles are hypotonic. the body temperature drops, the heart rate drops, the respiratory rate drops. It's the example that's often given is when a cat catches a mouse, the mouse's body temperature, heart rate, blood pressure become imperceptible. So it doesn't just become rigid, it becomes imperceptible, which means that the cat lets go of the mouse and then the mouse runs off. So in immense life threat, we have this other response, which is death feigning, like faking death. And so it has this physiological slowing down to the barest amount we need to survive, along with emotional and behavioral states that are more akin to things like dissociation. And so psychologists, this really resonated with psychologists because it's what they saw clinically, that clients who had experienced extreme trauma would sometimes report this state.
And so is that the state that's called defensive immobilization?
Yes, that is defensive immobilization.
Okay, so interesting. So this is not disassociation.
It is dissociation. So that would be the psychological and behavioral states that would arise with it.
Okay, and then physically, it's the feigning.
Yes, physically, it's the hypotonia, where there's like loss of muscle tone and slow heart rate, lowered blood pressure.
Fascinating. There's two other states, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that he also shines light on, Dr. Porges, is this idea that the autonomic nervous system is not antagonistic or dichotomous, meaning that it's not like you have the sympathetic or the parasympathetic on. It's that they can actually co-activate. So in safe mobilization, it's a co-activation of the safety response with the mobilization response. So this would be in things like sport, play, dance, creative writing, where you're actually sympathetically activated, but your nervous system is perceiving safety. So that's called safe mobilization. And then safe immobilization would be the sympathetic with the dorsal vagal, that immobilization response, which would be seen in states of stillness. So like meditative practices, where you experience deeper and deeper layers of stillness and slowing down, but still perceive safety.
Okay, so interesting. And like you said, it resonated with those who had therapy practices because they were seeing this in their practices with their clients, but they never had a name to put on it, or they never studied these type of systems before.
Yeah, it's really resonated. And in the field of psychology, there's a lot of talk about polyvagal theory. It hasn't quite made its way into, my background is as a physical therapist, so it hasn't quite made its way into that field yet. But when you look at the research on chronic pain, and we'll be talking about regulation and resilience, you can really see its applicability to the pain population as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now I'd love to talk about the mental gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas, and what is the relationship of these mental gunas to the neural platforms, and how do they influence one another? We've talked about these gunas a lot on the podcast, but if you want to give, just a little explanation of each one and then their relationship with the neural platforms, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So, for me, with my own practice as a physical therapist and yoga teacher and yoga therapist, as I began to learn about polyvagal theory, the thing that really excited me was that polyvagal theory also offered a way for yoga to be understood as a distinct field, profession, or practice with its own perspective that could be translated to healthcare context through polyvagal theory without becoming reductionistic. So that's what I'll kind of, hopefully that'll be clear in a second. Yoga and Ayurveda has this theory of the gunas, where this idea that from underlying qualities, there are shared physiological, psychological, and behavioral states, or experiences. So when sattva is predominant, there's a clearness, a lucidity that arises in the mind that is also reflected in a clearness and a relaxation of the body that's reflected in behaviors that are things like calm and equanimity. When rajas is predominant, there's an activation in the mind that can span from creativity to anger and agitation there's an activation in the body that can span from greater coordination and muscle engagement all the way to increased tension. And then in the behavior, anything from, motivation and creativity to things like anger and fight or flight. And same with tamas, that there's this underlying quality from which emotional or mental or mood states like lethargy, fatigue, obscuration are connected to physiological states and behavioral states. So it's really the same idea that there's an underlying thing, an underlying quality, whether it's a neural platform or a guna, from which shared behavior, emotional states, thought states, and physiology emerge. So this idea of the gunas and the neural platforms is wanting to talk about them in a way where we really speak to how they influence and are reflected in one another, but that they're not the same things. I would argue that the gunas are much bigger, and the neural platforms are simply the autonomic nervous system.
Right.
So you could, like, looking at that more specifically, like when the social engagement system is activated, if you're going to go from the nervous system to the gunas, when the social engagement system is activated, you're going to have more likelihood for sattva to emerge and that clearness and lucidity. When the sympathetic nervous system is activated, it's going to be reflected in this emergence of rajas. But you could also just flip that and say it the exact opposite way, that when sattva emerges and is predominant, you're going to have more likelihood to activate the social engagement. When rajas is mobilized or predominant, you're going to have more propensity towards the sympathetic nervous system activating.
Right. So, and what about with the defensive immobilization?
Mm-hmm. So with the defensive immobilization, the same idea of tamas, so that we can have, so that when tamas is predominant, there's this obscuration, this lethargy, this dullness, which is reflected in these defensive mobilizations of death feigning or dissociation, and vice versa. So the significance of this whole idea of connecting the two is so that when, as a yoga therapist, when I evaluate and assess someone, I can begin to look at what they're telling me about their mental state, their emotional state, their connection to spirituality, their physiological state, their experience of pain or discomfort. And I can begin to look at, well, is this an increase in rajas? Is this an increase in tamas? How do I see the gunas reflected in this person? And then if I'm talking to a healthcare provider or even sometimes a client, if they're not open to that language, I can speak to it in terms of the autonomic nervous system, that we're working with cultivating this, which we'll go into more, but cultivating certain states of the nervous system to affect the body and mind.
Yeah, that's so great that you can choose the language depending on who your client is.
Yeah, and I think that's really important when we look at, even in the medical field now, they're starting to really do these things like, shared decision making and person-centered care, which is what we already do in our fields of Ayurveda and yoga. So, really finding what language does the person need to hear in order to understand it. And what's great about this is then people begin to understand yoga and Ayurveda as something really different than the allopathic medical perspective, which again is a great perspective for certain conditions and certain things. However, when we're looking at these complex kind of chronic lifestyle illnesses or chronic pain conditions, how do we address that the person is showing up with symptoms throughout many systems of the body, throughout the mind, as well as the way they interact with life. And both Polyvagal Theory and the Gunas allow us a way to come underneath to influence all of those. Yes,
and it's so important that the client has an active part in their healing so that they're not disassociated with it, because that has a huge effect on their healing journey as well.
Yes.
Now, going through the other two states, the safe mobilization, I know you mentioned that was a co-activation, right, of the two systems.
So I would look at that safe mobilization as sattva with some rajas and tamas. So really safe mobile. So, in most things that I've read about the gunas, it really talks about them in varying proportions so that it's not like you're all in sattva or all in rajas or all in tamas, that we can have this underlying sattva for safety and then rajas for activation and safe mobilization. And likewise, safe immobilization, that tamas can provide this sense of stability and grounding that's really important. And so when we have safety with those qualities, then we have safe immobilization.
Great. And that's it. The gunas are always cycling. We need a certain amount of, rajas to get us activated, to wake us up in the morning. We need a certain amount of tamas to get us to calm down the evening and get ready for sleep. And there's a scale, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Right. Okay, great. Well, thanks. That's just such interesting information. I appreciate you sharing that with us. So now we understand these neural platforms and the 5 global states, and then how to look at it from the viewpoint of the gunas. I'd like to just talk about this concept of self-regulation and resilience and the transcending the gunas. So that's a big topic we're going to cover. Maybe we should start with, if you have a case study or an example of a client that you have worked with and how you bring them on this healing journey.
Yeah, I was thinking that would probably be best, like in context. So I'm just going to use someone that I often use, and because she's a good example. So someone with chronic low back pain, a history of migraines, suffers from difficulty with sleep, as well as anxiety, with some depression, with some episodes of depression. So, seeing someone with complex pain and emotional symptoms or issues that they want to work with. So I would first think about, like, how do I help this person experience sattva? So how do I help them regulate their nervous system to come into a calm state of the body and mind? Because that calm state of the body mind is going to relax excess tension, contributing to low back pain and headaches. It's going to cultivate more capacity for things like calm, peace, acceptance, compassion, especially for this person. She tended to not have a lot of self-compassion. She would be pretty negative about her self-image. So I'm going to work with cultivating that. So we worked with finding the postures that would create greater ease in her body, breathing techniques that would create greater ease, and some meditations as well. So you don't always need to begin with restorative postures, but for this person and many of my clients, I often begin with more restorative postures to help create a parasympathetic nervous system experience in the body, so that then they can experience the relaxation of their muscles in a safe way, and they're more likely then to experience things like calmness or contentment or equanimity.
Right. It's almost like you have to first calm the situation down before you can go any deeper. Right. And, we mentioned earlier about the diaphragm, and the vagus nerve runs through the diaphragm. So the breathing, the pranayama, is extremely important in this healing journey, right?
Yeah, so pranayama is one of the most powerful ways we have of influencing the vagus nerve and helping to activate it towards a parasympathetic response. And so really by elongating the exhalation is one of the most powerful ways to do that. It doesn't need to be twice as long or any certain ratio, but just lengthening the exhale, which we can do with like pursed lip breathing, like pursing the lips as you exhale will slow it. Chanting will slow the exhale, so making sound. Brahmari B breath will slow the exhale. So all those ways we have of helping the exhalation become a little slower to activate the parasympathetic system.
Great. And so you talk with your client, and then you work first of all on calming the client. So I guess that then there's a greater awareness. So the client, once the client is in a more calmer state, more in a parasympathetic nervous system, that she has more awareness and maybe can be more receptive to other items that you bring into her healing journey. Is that true?
That is definitely true. And, one of the things that I try to help cultivate in those experiences is to give the client an option of something they didn't know they had. So someone in chronic pain all of a sudden realizes, wait, I can be comfortable. I can be relaxed.
Right.
I can be calm.
Right.
And so, if they have a felt experience of that, then they know it to be true.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to try to talk them into anything. So trying to help them find an experience that challenges their belief of what's possible. So finding those states of relaxation, so then they learn that that's a possibility for them. And in those states, we can build interoception. So when we're in relaxed states, we have greater ability for interoception, which is that inner awareness of bodily sensation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And can you talk to us a little bit about the top-down processes versus the bottom-up processes?
Yeah. So what I consider top-down processes, and in my what I've looked at, is that it's these things that start in the mind and then affect down cascade and affect the body. So, for example, if I use a yama or niyama to cultivate a certain principle, or if I use a meditation, I'm using my mind, which then affects a physiological response in my body. Bottom up would do the opposite. I'm going to more directly use my body to affect my mind. So we also know that by changing body positions and doing things with our body, it affects our mental and mood state. So there's lab and movement analysis that has really kind of gone pretty deep and has this really nice literature about how rising and expansive backbending movements are related to happiness. So for someone who's coming in with more depressive states, when I look for restorative postures, I'll try to look for ones that are more of a backbending experience in order to cultivate the moods of lightness or happiness. And if someone has more of anxiety, I might try to find those positions that are more grounding in order to cultivate a more grounding emotional experience to go along with the physiological experience.
Great. I love that. That's wonderful. Wonderful. And I mentioned earlier about self-regulation and resilience. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So self-regulation is this ability to bring us into relaxed body, mind, behavioral states. So really what we've talked about so far would be, how do we help the client or patient to experience these states of regulation and peace and ease in the body and mind, so that they can then do it for themselves. Great. They learn how to be aware of when they're out of those states and to come back into them. So while self-regulation is great, it's not really what life is like. So the next part of my work with clients is usually once I know that they can find safe states of the body and mind, I then help them to build resilience. And so resilience is about the ability to, in a time-effective and efficient way, become activated and come back down to restoration. So in building resilience, once the person is proficient at finding these states of safety and calm and ease, then we'll find a posture that activates their system a little bit and then come back down. So we might do 1 or 2 postures of activation and then come back down to relaxation. So for this person, that I've been talking about, standing postures would often create activation in her body and pain. So once she was pretty grounded in what postures to do for relaxation and safety, we would do standing postures, just a couple, to that point of a beginning of activation, and then we would come back down to a restorative posture, do a couple activation, a couple restorative. So I consider that really the first stage of resilience, is getting the person to be aware that they can become activated and come back. Then the next stage is what I often call and other people, widening the window of tolerance for sensation. So this is the idea of really working with safe mobilization and safe immobilization. So in yoga, we do this with things like, if you're in bridge posture and you're asking the person to bring a relaxing intention to mind and to lengthen the exhale, we're giving them both stimulus of safety and calm and activation, because they're in an active posture like bridge. So in working with safe mobilization, I'm trying to help the person build a greater tolerance to be activated while experiencing safety. I saw this in the research on aerobic exercise one time, and they called it anxiety sensitivity. And they talked about when people have anxiety, that they could use aerobic exercise, like on a treadmill, so that the person was in a safe, controlled environment, and they could experience their heart rate going faster, their breath rate going faster, but also realize that they were safe at the same time. So they could get used to those symptoms of anxiety, but still maintain a sense of safety.
And I love that, like in Ayurveda, you're also empowering your clients to become self-sufficient and in the self-regulation. So you're giving them a little good stress, right? A little EU stress to build the resilience. And of course, this is going to boost their immunity and give them that buffer to stress as they go through life. And knowing that they have the power to self-regulate really gives them a sense of well-being, and that they can take care of themselves.
Yeah, and then they can translate it to their own, life situation. So like this person I'm talking about, she was able to take these teachings and then go on a trip with her husband to another country and to experience a greater amount of activity and feeling confident that she knew what to do if something got triggered.
Love that. Yeah, that's so wonderful. Okay, so now I'd love to talk about transcending the gunas. When I was reading your work, you mentioned a piece from the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna explains about the person who transcends the gunas finds a capacity for unwavering equanimity without preference for any guna. So that I'll let you go ahead and explain it.
Yeah. And, what I find really exciting about this work is because I'm in the field of chronic pain and pain science, is that they talk a lot about the importance of regulation and resilience. And then I think yoga takes it this other step further and says, not only can we learn how to build resilience, but we can actually change our relationship with everything that arises, so that we can come to a space where we experience the gunas, we experience rajas, we experience tamas, we experience sattva, we experience the sympathetic nervous system and all these fluctuations that arise, while remaining connected to equanimity, joy, and contentment, which means that we don't have to just try to manage these things that are happening. Instead, we begin to allow and really deeply accept and embrace that tamas is going to arise, rajas is going to arise, but it doesn't separate me or disconnect me from who I am, from this essential nature of equanimity that is at the core of being.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And also being able to look at them and see them arise, but without getting involved in the higher end of the scale of rajas and letting it overtake you and letting that fear and that anxiety send you deep into the sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah, so that we can really say, like, we can really sit in any situation and say, oh, tamas is arising right now. Like, here's tamas, and here's what it looks like. Here's what it feels like in my body. Here's what it feels like in my mind. This is what it calls me into. And then how do I want to be in that? I can then have the inquiry of, like, what relationship do I want with that energy? Do I want to sit with it? Do I want to take a nap? Do I want to go on a walk? Like, what is it that I am being called to do in relationship to it? So that tamas no longer rules me, but rather I have a relationship and a friendship where I'm not trying to get rid of it, but I'm using it as a friend and a messenger of, like, what's needed in this moment, what's being called for.
Yeah, I love that. And it's more about having a curiosity more than a fear.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. And I love how, Marlysa, that you're taking, your physiotherapy education and then bringing in these Eastern sciences and converging that together to get a really holistic view for your client, which is amazing.
Yeah, I will say that, like, I do every so often teach people, like, some of these terms, because I do find, like, the terms rajas and tamas to be really beneficial for people that have not grown up with that language. The idea of saying I'm feeling anxious or depressed has a lot of judgment to it. Right. Whereas if they can see that as an expression of rajas or tamas, there's a bit less of a judgment about it, because they don't have as much baggage behind the terms.
Yeah, so true. It's like, that's an energy rather than that's part of me.
Yes.
Before we finish up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us that we didn't get to talk about?
Well, I think I kind of touched on this a little bit. So I just, to me, the thing that I'm most excited about in this work is helping other people to understand that this perspective that yoga and Ayurveda brings and how it can really help shift our paradigm and perspective of seeing the body systems as separate and those as separate from the mind and those as separate than how we relate to life, to looking at these underlying contributing factors that have such an impact on the health and well-being throughout our system, body and mind and behavior. And so, to really I think stay true to what yoga and Ayurveda have to offer, which is this shift in how we're looking at those and their relationships to one another.
Yeah, so true. And it's wonderful that these new theories like Polyvagal Theory, and we can take that and then look at it like you've done in relation to the gunas and merge it together.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed this conversation. It's such fascinating work you're doing, Marlysa. Can you tell us what you are working on and where people can find out more about you?
Yeah, I have a website, marlysasullivan.com. And so I have some of my work that I'm doing there. And what I'm really involved in right now is that I've written these 2 theory papers, this one on polyvagal theory and the gunas, and another one on this topic of what Aristotle called eudaimonia, which just simply is this connection to one's authentic nature, living in alignment with values and meaning and purpose, and looking at both these ideas of meaning and purpose, living in alignment with values, and regulation and resilience as the underlying framework from which yoga has positive effect on the health and well-being of someone. So right now I'm putting together a research study with some people, and we were looking for ways to get it done, where I'm working with Stephen Porges and Richard Miller and looking at doing a yoga intervention that is based on these ideas of connecting to meaning and purpose and values and autonomic regulation and resilience, and that effect on chronic pain.
Fascinating. Now, that's definitely resonating with me. I'm all about connecting with your true nature. And I think that's amazing. Beautiful. And I will link to your website in the show notes. And you also have a book.
Yeah, I have a new book coming out. It's called Understanding Yoga Therapy, Applied Philosophy and Science for Wellbeing. And this is my, book that has been in the making for 15 years. And It starts with the philosophy of yoga with some stories from the Mahabharata and clinical applications, and then goes into the science of polyvagal theory and eudaimonia. And the practical piece is divided into practices for regulation, interoception, and then resilience.
Wow, wonderful. Well, like I said, I'll link to all that in the show notes, and I would love to have you back when you're ready to talk about eudaimonia, because that really resonates with me as well. That sounds fascinating.
I would love that.
Marlysa, it's been a pleasure. I've learned so much. Great information you shared with us today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, listen, take good care of yourself, and I look forward to having you back maybe in the future.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, take good care of yourself. Bye for now.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that chat with Marlysa. I certainly did. And please check out all the links mentioned in this episode in the show notes. You'll also find them over on my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. Just go to the podcast page. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you, and maybe leave a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcast. I would truly appreciate it. If you find that this episode would be helpful to family or friends, please share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and ciao for now.